1-hour TV show, and you said mostly on YouTube these days?
Yeah, that's kind of been the easiest way to promote it. We used to, and we still are on some other platforms, including Amazon Prime. But we just found that YouTube's an easy way. Everybody has YouTube. It has a good international reach. It's an easy way for everybody to see it.
Well, it's a really fun show to get people to sort of travel along with you and see these different places. But your method of wine education is just so warm and welcoming. And it's just a real pleasure to watch, even as somebody who's like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. Still, it's like, oh, that looks so nice.
Yeah, I mean, I always say I'm always learning. When I'm doing the show, when I'm researching the show, even if it's things that maybe I learned back when I was in restaurants or taking my SOM exam, we're never quite solid enough as we'd like to be. And
welcome to the whatever day it is today, May 10th, Finance Committee meeting, the second in a series of 3. First off, do we have any public comments from the people here in the council chamber? As usual. How about people on Zoom? Anybody on Zoom, Jamie? I don't think I see any.
With their hand raised.
Okay. First, do you want to give us the lay of the land, Jamie, or?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Chairman, really quickly, folks have asked for many years, and finally we've delivered. Where all 3 superintendents that represent the district are in the House. And so I just want to thank the superintendent and the staff from Norfolk Aggie. They're going to bat lead off. I think they have the shortest, they have the smallest budget, the shortest presentation, but I just want to thank them for coming out and just introducing themselves to both the Finance Committee, but really more the community, live on TV and on Zoom, and just how great it is to have them here, and thank them for taking a few minutes out. So tonight, I think it's pretty straightforward on the agenda. I know the most discussion will probably come around the public school district, but we've got the Norfolk Aggie here. We're going to just talk for a few minutes, introduce themselves to the community. Tri-County has a short presentation on their budget, presumably also a few slides about the school building project, and then the Franklin Public School District will go last.
Gentlemen, introduce yourself if you would, and give us a short presentation.
We promise to be very brief. My name is John Martin. I am the superintendent at Norfolk Aggie, finishing up my 2nd year there. So if you have any real hard questions, don't ask me. I don't know. I won't know the answer. To my left is John Wallace. I guess he can introduce himself.
Again, John Wallace, business manager of Norfolk Aggie, and also in my 2nd year at the school. So John and I came half of a year apart, so both of us still learning the ropes.
One thing, you are in Walpole, correct?
Walpole,
Because I'm not sure everybody is fully aware of even, I know where you are, but.
400 Main Street, which is on Route 1A. We have 365 acres. We were incorporated in 1916, so we've been around for a while. The first buildings were constructed in 1917. And the actual first campus for the Aggie was in Weymouth. I couldn't tell you exactly where. I'm not that boned up on my history, but I know that there was a building in Weymouth, and then when the buildings out in Walpole were finished, everybody moved over there. We have 4 majors that the students study and can opt into. We have animal science, plant science, environmental science, and agricultural mechanics. Not unlike Tri-County, our kids go through an exploratory program their freshman year. We actually extend it into the sophomore year, and then they choose their major that they will study exclusively for their junior and senior year. We have a very high graduation rate, about, depending on the year, anywhere from 60 to 70% of our kids go to a 2 or a 4-year university. Most of the others go straight into the workforce, and as you probably know, the jobs that we train our kids for, again, like Tri-County, are very much in demand right now. They're better paying than they ever have been, and there is a labor crisis when it comes to some of these vocational experiences. So that's a little bit of background on the school itself. We are an agricultural school. We have a couple acres worth of a garden. We have 25 cattle, beef and dairy cows. We have about 17 horses, a couple hundred fish, rodents, snakes, turtles, pigs, lambs, sheep, goats, and a llama. And I've probably left out a few of the basic food groups there. And the most populated program right now is animal science. A lot of our kids are attracted because of the animals themselves, but it's not what we do exclusively. We have the other three majors that kids can opt into. Do you have any questions about the programming or the school itself?
How
I
many,
can answer.
how many students total?
About 560.
And do you know how many roughly come from like the Franklin area?
Sure, yeah, I have those statistics. So for this year, FY '23, we had 16 students from Franklin, which is probably above average for in-county. We have students from all towns in Norfolk County except for 2 currently, and we have about 50 out-of-county towns. So we have about 70 some towns that send us at least 1 student. But Franklin this year had 16 students, 3 of which are seniors, so we hope to get 13 returning Franklin students. And so far, we've had about 16 applications for either the freshman class or the sophomore class, because we accept sophomores in the school as well. So it's likely that our population of Franklin students will go up a little bit from what it was this year. Maybe 2-3 more students I would anticipate possibly having from Franklin. So Franklin's a significant town within and without Norfolk County for us. You know, the towns that send us more than 10 students are meaningful to us. And like I said, there are a handful of those towns in Norfolk County and a handful outside of Norfolk.
Sure. Do you still offer the beekeeping program?
Well, we have a beekeeping club, so yes, we do have bees on campus, and we also rent our space to the Beekeeping
Beekeepers.
Association,
Yeah.
whatever it's called, yeah. So we have two connections to beekeeping on the school.
And if you would, one of our plant science teachers is the advisor for the beekeeping club, and if she were here tonight, she would tell you that she'd like to triple or quadruple our capacity for bees and making honey, but
If needed.
we're not there yet.
Just a,
Oh, so I was gonna say, what's the application process like?
It's the same as it is in any other vocational school in Massachusetts. You fill out an application, you participate in an interview process, you tour the campus, and then we take a look at your middle school records and come up with a magic number that admits you or puts you on a wait list. It's all-
The components this year are what, John, from the middle school record? There are only 2 parts of the middle school record that we look at, right?
Yeah, we no longer look at grades, we look at attendance, we look at, and we don't look at letters of reference either. Those were 2 criteria that we eliminated in the admissions changeover from last year. So we place a high premium on the interview, which is worth 75 points out of 100. And then we look at, as I said, we look at attendance and we look at
Significant discipline only now. right?
grades and significant discipline.
I actually know a graduate who's a successful farrier, is that the word?
Mhm, Yep.
Up in
exactly.
Vermont, running her own business, doing very, very well. And that's,
Like most vocational schools, our student body is very diverse. So as I mentioned, I mentioned the kids who go to college. We also have a healthy percentage of kids, as I said, that go straight into the workforce and have meaningful, challenging jobs and are earning good salaries as a result. And then we also have kids who go to Tufts Medical School and they become veterinarians.
what's the largest contributing community?
Most students from in town, I think, is Weymouth.
But out of town, the biggest town in general, or city in general, that sends us students is Boston.
Boston.
Really?
Yeah, we have 40-some kids from Boston, so it's by a decent amount bigger than any other city or town. And Brockton actually sends us a bunch of kids
Close
too.
second, yeah.
Yeah, 2 out-of-county towns.
Are you the only agricultural high school in the state?
No, there are 4 agricultural high schools in the state. There's one in Bristol County, there's one in Essex up on the North Shore, and there's one out west. So they're pretty well spaced out with the exception of us in Bristol. Students from Plymouth County tend to go to either Norfolk County or Bristol. Other than that, we get everybody that's sort of north of us, Framingham, Natick, up there. That's where most of our students come from, and then we get them from Boston, obviously.
What is your peak enrollment? Like, are you turning kids away, or are you able to accept? Like,
Yeah,
a
no,
wait
we have a
list?
waiting list. As John said, we're approaching sort of 575, 580 students. This year we had about 450 students apply, and we only accepted 155. So there's quite a bit demand for vocational education in general in Massachusetts, and for us in particular. It's been building for us, and Bristol County is expanding its capacity, so they've built a lot of buildings, so they're trying to accept more students, but there's definitely a demand for what we're offering that's beyond what we can satisfy with the current buildings that we have. That's really what's limiting us, is buildings.
Our goal, probably not going to be achieved in my tenure, but maybe at some point in the future, would be to grow and add students, add faculty, add buildings, because the demand is there. We have so many kids that we have to turn away, and sometimes you hear the stories, from the kids themselves or from mom and dad, and it's really heart-wrenching that we have to say no to so many kids.
Go ahead, Norm,
Sorry, I
please.
could ask questions on this all night, so I will restrict myself. This is
Go
so
for it.
interesting.
If you'd like to come over for a
We might
tour,
have to do a deep dive on
Jamie
this at
has
some
my
point.
email.
Now I forget what I was gonna ask. Oh, what's like with that many applicants and you only accept 155, what's like the differentiating factor? Like, I know what you said you looked at, but there has to be something very unique that is differentiating to get to that
Well,
low acceptance
basically,
rate.
it's pretty simple at the end of the day. The top 155 scores get in, and everybody else is
Simple math.
waitlisted.
Right. I mean, the biggest factor is the interview, and in the interview, it's just something as
For them.
prosaic as fit. Is it the fit of that student for our school? And kids come to our school with ideas of careers they want to go in, and some kids come without ideas, but we just feel like they have what you need to succeed at the Aggie. It's not an easy school to go to because it's not the easiest default for anybody, because you're coming from your own town. Sometimes getting there is a 45-minute trip in the morning and a 45-minute trip at home, and after-school activities are complicated. So kids that go there really want to go there, and they express that in the interview about what they're into. A lot of them are into animals, as John said, but some of them, the interesting thing about vocational schools in general is for some kids, it's just the way to get through high school. That traditional high school just doesn't work for them, sitting in the classroom and watching somebody else talk. That just doesn't work for them. I've had several parents say to me, I'm not sure my child would get through high school if they didn't go to a vocational school. It's not about the Aggie, it's just about the ability to learn in a different way, move themselves around from building to building, get outside. So it's really heartbreaking, like John's saying, when you have to turn down kids who, this is really where they want to go, and this is really their idea of how high school is tolerable. How to get through high school is to go to a vocational school.
I'm good for right now.
A financing question. And I understand it's not on the immediate horizon, but it's obviously on a long-term horizon.
Mm-hmm.
How would you finance buildings? I mean, Tri-County is here, they're gonna have to replace their building, and we know how they'll do that. How would you do it?
Well, we have a bunch of smaller buildings, so we don't have the big gigantic building to build, which would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So John and I have a plan to try to harness the power of our alumni association and our alumni network. We've been around, as John mentioned, for over 100 years, so we've got some very established and successful alumni. That's one of our angles. Another angle is to borrow money. We have borrowed money and floated bonds and borrowed money for school improvements and building in the future, and then a combination, and then hopefully some money from the county itself. The county is selling one of its assets, right now. It's selling one of its courthouses, so they're establishing a capital fund for the future for county needs. And the school is a department of the county of Norfolk. So we're assuming, right, John, that some of that money is going to go our way
We're hoping.
when we have the right project.
Yep.
Yeah. So it'll be a combination of sources.
And if we have to go down the MSBA road, then we look at that as well. But it's in the distance, as you noted, Mr. Conley.
It's been a long time coming, but it's nice to have.
A lot of our
We'll learn
buildings.
more tonight than all.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our buildings were renovated in, what,
2013 and 14, yes.
2013, 14. But a lot of them haven't been touched in 50, 60 years, so they're showing signs of age. Leaky roofs and things like that.
Yeah. I would, before we're finished, if it's okay, I'd like to just
Go ahead.
give some thanks to some school adjustment counselors and counselors that work in the school that have dealt with our admissions people. That she asked me to maybe mention a few names if I could at the meeting. So Hannah Lubenow, Allison Castro, and Adrienne Smith are all people that worked as counselors in the middle schools in Franklin, in either Horace Mann School or Remington, and have facilitated the admissions process. So she wanted me to put their names out there as a thank you to, I guess, to the town of
Your
Franklin. and to the
bosses are
schools.
sitting behind you,
Yeah.
very appropriate.
So we appreciate them, and we appreciate Franklin. You know, we appreciate the towns that send us students. You know, it's an honor to get somebody's students from them, and an obligation for us to educate them properly. And hopefully it works for both parties. It's an expensive education to deliver, you know, so it's impossible for a town to provide an agricultural education in any meaningful financial way. It would just be impossible. So we hope that what we're doing, which is, you know, consolidating a bunch of kids from different towns and providing an education that we hope a cost-effective way, you know, we hope it's working for you guys too, because it's working for us, you know, to get kids from Franklin and all these other towns in Norfolk.
So, the 66.6 this year, is there a tuition that we get billed per?
Yeah.
The 13 or whatever it was?
Yeah, you get billed an in-county tuition, so we have two different kinds of tuition. We have out-of-county tuition and in-county tuition. In-county tuition is a greatly reduced rate that we charge for Norfolk County residents, students from Norfolk County. So we charge about $4,000. A current rate for each student that we get from Franklin, for instance, would be about $4,000 is what we charge to educate them. That changed only 1.6%, I think, from last year's rate. So we really were conscious. You guys really stepped up for us last year when we did increase our rate from about $2,000 to $4,000 because we hadn't changed it in a bunch of years. It was part of what John and I felt like we needed to do to get the school to operate properly and to be able to have the money to provide the education we wanted to provide. You guys did so along with everybody else in Norfolk County without any complaints, right, John? We were really,
A lot of questions, but no complaints.
yeah, it was really well supported by everybody in Norfolk County, including Franklin, obviously. So this year we have a very minor increase, but we charge $4,000 and change for each student.
If I could interject, and it may be on your minds right now, so I'll volunteer this. One of the reasons that we had to hike the tuition last year is that the school had, for the better part of a decade, been running a pretty significant structural deficit. And the only way to get out from under that was to raise tuition for the in-county as well as the out-of-county towns. So as John said, we thank all of the towns for, again, not pushing back too hard on us because everybody understood that we were in a pretty precarious situation.
Sounds like a bargain to me. Anybody else? Anybody out in the audience? Guess not. Well, thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, Mr. Helen.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
The girl that's a friend, she went there, doing marvelous, making a great income. Tri-County is next, whenever we're ready.
That slide thing at the bottom there.
Okay, when you're ready to go, just who you are and go for it.
All right, hello, good evening. I'm Karen McGuire. I'm the superintendent at Tri-County. I also have been here for 2 years. I guess it's a trend, except for Dan. He's been here a little bit longer.
Yeah, Dan Haynes, School Business Manager. I'm ending my 4th year at Tri-County.
So thank you for having us here this evening. It was nice that we met with you last year at the same time to go over our budget. We were here, it seems like just yesterday, but I think it was back in November that we presented to Town Council on the building project. So Tri-County is in the process right now, still with the MSBA of the building project. We're about halfway through the pipeline, which is about eight steps long. We'll know next month, in the middle of June, what we'll be looking at for a final scope and budget for the project. Right now, we anticipate it to be in about the $280 million range for a brand-new building on the Tri-County site. So not much has changed since we came back in the fall to talk about where we were with the process. But again, we'll know about June 15th or so. And then we do anticipate coming back out for another round of visits with the towns. We have 11 towns that make up Tri-County, everywhere from Sherburne all the way down to Seekonk. Franklin, of course, is where our home base is. We're right around the corner up the hill, and proud to be there and happy to still continue. We've been there about 50 years, and looking forward to being there for 50 more. So, this evening, Dan's our business manager, and he'll go through some slides that we have for the budget, our current budget.
Briefly, recognizing your time, being mindful of that, and our friends at Franklin Public Schools will be after us. So in our budget, when we started this process back in November, we established some budgetary goals in maintaining our high-quality education at Tri-County, strategies to reach those goals. We've got some targeted SPED and SEL and mental health services. We did receive a $180,000 grant this year to help fund some of that. And our financial plan, allocating our financial resources. Challenges, the Chapter 70 formula, which I'll talk to very briefly coming up. The cost of vocational supplies and equipment, inflation, supply chain issues, we're all well aware of those. We buy pretty expensive pieces of equipment. Our auto tech has lifts like you would see in a garage. And we have a few of those. So it's very expensive to provide vocational education. So this is hard to see, but what I really want to point out here is our Chapter 70 aid, we receive the minimal aid, which, depending on where we are with the state budget, somewhere between $30 and $60 per student. So not a large incremental increase in one of our larger revenue sources. So that does pose a problem for the district, and it's a pretty simple graph, but if you look at the red, that's our state aid, which has been flat for some time. And the blue is the assessments to our member communities, which is increasing in accordance with our costs on a yearly basis, not having that additional state aid to help fund the increases in our budget. This is our, some Chapter 70 formula trends. This goes back to ed reform in 1993. This is showing the foundation budget in the blue, the Chapter 70 aid again, which has been flat over a number of years, and then what our net school spending and actual net school spending are over that span of time. So Tri-County's enrollment, if we go back to 2020, that would have been the students that would have been in the building at 10/1/18, actually, or 10/1/20. If you look at that 981, we dropped off. We had 3 consecutive years of reductions there in our enrollment. So 2024, those are the students at 10/1/22, reversed that trend. We're up to 935 students district-wide. We do have a substantial special ed population, and we have co-taught classrooms. That's an expensive model to deliver special ed services. But we vary, from the 30 to 32% range on a yearly basis with special education. So some of the strategies, as I mentioned, we have state-of-the-art equipment. It is very expensive. Special ed, you try to meet the needs of the students in the classroom. Building on our past success with SEL and mental health services. As Superintendent McGuire mentioned, partnering with the MSBA to build an appropriate future-ready school. Improvements to curriculum, We do have robust athletic and extracurricular activities at the school. We call that educating the whole child. We continue to work with our member communities as outreach to, bring the students to the school who really need to be there. Some of what John mentioned for the Aggie school, we have those similar students that thrive in the vocational setting, but maybe not necessarily in a comprehensive school. So our budget, 4.19% increase overall. You can see 64% of our budget is funded through town assessments, about 29% with Chapter 70 and transportation reimbursement from the state. That's just the graph of the same. Here's a little look at our student enrollment. So Franklin had an additional 7 students. Franklin is the second largest sender of students to the school. 164 students in the budget year for 2024. Non-resident enrollment, you'll see a drop there. That was intentional. We had a number of applicants from the in-district that filled our seats for the freshman class. Some of that we've identified as an 8th grade bump in just demographics and the number of students. But I also feel that some of that is recognizing a career tech education and the benefits of that and what that can do for you as you move forward. So here's our district assessments amongst the 11 communities. You can see that the 3 communities that have decreases in their assessment are the communities that had a decrease in their enrollment. So it certainly makes sense. Our spending, you can see obviously instruction is our largest, 59% of our expenses. Our total budget for fiscal 24, $23,414,519. This is graphed. This is just a different way looking at the budget by object. You can see we're a very human organization. About 78% of our budget is salaries and employee benefits. That would be typical of most schools in the Commonwealth. These are just some statistics related to Franklin, over the 10-year period. You've had a decrease in enrollment from the high of 231 in fiscal 15 to the year we're budgeting 164. And here's what it looks like graphed. So it's slight trend downward, but some of that followed our trend downward for enrollment. This is just the Chapter 70 formula for the town as a whole. The required minimum contribution allocated back based on the students to Norfolk County, Aggie, Tri-County, and Franklin Public Schools. And if you look at our budget, particularly for any of our communities, most of the budget is made up of the state required minimum contribution. We assess $83,000 for Franklin above the minimum, and we have our net transportation and capital and debt assessment. So the total assessment, fiscal 24, $2,674,447, $134,000 increase over the prior year. So there's a great picture of Governor Baker, who came to visit the school in October, I believe. Made a great impression on the students. He's very interested in career tech education, has been a big supporter of not only Tri-County, but all the vocational schools in the state. Bottom middle, that's our wrestling team, undefeated this past season.
Is that 2 years in a row?
Wanted to get that in. So that was a brief, hopefully brief overview of the budget for fiscal 24.
Questions, guys?
I have a question. It might be a Jamie question as well, because they're showing the budget of 2.6 and we have it in as 2.7.
Yeah, through Mr. Chairman. So all of state aid numbers, every year we've done this, and this is just how a lot of towns do their assumptions, is we use House 1 from the governor when they put their budget out. In this case, it was a little later because it was a new governor, but usually it's the end of January. This year it was the beginning of March. And then we come back, as everybody knows, in November. This year we'll end up doing another budget rewrite probably in the summer, is my guess. to make sure we capture as much revenue and get the numbers as accurate as possible, just obviously giving the competing challenges that we talked about on Monday and we're going to talk about tonight and tomorrow. And so the numbers that are in there, and Tri-County is a part of that, just like the Aggie School is a part of that. We just go to the cherry sheet and the finance director plucks out the numbers, you know, from top to bottom, bottom to top, plugs them in the model, and that's what we use here. Those numbers will unquestionably change. Usually they are not very dramatic, and so I didn't capture what the other number was on the chart there. I think maybe the assessment might even be a little lower.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking
Yeah,
about. The assessment
and
is
so
gonna
we'll
be lower.
readjust the actual figures when the state finalizes its budget, likely in July.
Got it, okay.
Quiet group. Do you, what is, there's always a lot of talk this time of the year about how much is spent per student. What is your number?
It's about $16,000 per student. I think statewide, it's about $12,700. But as I've mentioned, vocational schools, the equipment we need to purchase, it costs more to run a vocational school than a comprehensive school.
It's roughly comparable to what public schools do, if I'm not mistaken. It's in the ballpark, anyway. Yeah.
The difference that we'll see is with the building project. So certainly, to try to build a facility like the training facility that Tri-County is with 16 career and tech programs along with a regular comprehensive high school piece, it is a higher price range than you'd find in a comprehensive school. So that's why we're talking about the $280 million range. We currently have legislation, and Jamie knows this, and we have been working with our legislators to try to implore upon the Mass School Building Authority to reimburse at a higher rate for vocational school building projects. Right now, we're reimbursed at the same rate as a comprehensive high school or an elementary school even though the project itself will cost a lot more money to build. There are 9 schools currently, vocational schools in the MSBA pipeline, and they impact 119 communities, just like Franklin. All of those 119 communities are in the same situation where they're trying to figure out how are we going to be able to fit this in with our elementary or high school or fire station or police station or what have you. So our legislation is asking for an increase in the reimbursement and for 2 seats on the MSBA Board of Directors, 2 additional seats that would be able to weigh into the conversation when they start talking about reimbursement rates. To be able to just be the voice of what we need for these schools. It impacts everyone. So. The bill is currently ready to be scheduled with the Joint Committee on Education. It's made it through approval with both the House and the Senate. And once we have a date for the hearing, we'll let the town administrators know so that people can get back on and lobby to say that they support the legislation. So.
Sorry, I can't talk. So of the 280 million, do we have like an idea of like roughly percentage what you'll get back in reimbursements? Because then I assume the rest of the bill gets allocated amongst the participating towns, right?
That's right. So it looks about 100 million right now is what we're thinking. But again, we'll know better in June exactly what that number looks like. Yeah. So.
And can you remind me, when are we thinking this project will kick off? I know we've probably talked about it in November, so forgive me, but.
So that's fine. No. So we'll get the final scope and budget approval. We'll know what the number is in June, but then at the August 30th, 31st MSBA Board of Directors meeting, they will vote at that meeting to give the final scope and budget, the actual vote to give that final scope and budget. And from that point, we have 120 days to have a district-wide election for the residents to come out to vote for the project. We've been working with the town clerks, and they have scheduled, or anticipate to schedule October 24th as the date for the district-wide election. And what that means basically is that in all 11 of our communities, the residents would come out at the same time on the same day and vote yes or no on the project. Provided the project's approved, we anticipate that later that fall to break ground. The building would be completed in 2027.
And I assume you need just majority vote to pass it?
Majority vote of all residents that come out to vote. So it's not Franklin, if Franklin votes yes, and Medway votes no, and
So it's
North
not by
Attleboro
town,
votes,
it's
it's
by
not by
total.
town, right. If you picture all 11 of the tri-county communities as one great big town, it's the combination of all of those people that
Yeah.
come out to vote. Yeah, majority of the people that come out to vote.
So you could have an overwhelming yes in one community, an overwhelming no in another that would get, so Sherburne votes no, Franklin votes yes.
Yes.
We would obviously bury Sherburne in terms of numbers. So that's a yes overall, in my,
It's like a
50%
popular
plus
vote.
one.
huh?
50% plus one. It's the
Of
cumulative.
all the towns, not
Cumulative.
individually.
Cumulative. Yep.
So with regard to the assessments to the towns for the school build, what's the formula that each town gets assessed? Is it equal?
It's based on enrollment.
Based on
It's based on
enrollment?
10-1 enrollment.
So I saw the enrollment numbers kind of fluctuating.
Right. So it will fluctuate
So
on
it
a
will
yearly basis.
So there is another piece of legislation that talks about averaging, and doing the bill based on an average of 5 years. And Dan's been a fan of that for a long time. That way people know what they're looking at year to year, and you don't have this up and down, up and down.
Smooths out the process.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Communities.
Yeah.
How do you get your students? Do they reach out, or do you send folks to the various districts and schools, or
Yeah.
how does that process work?
So we have a lot of legacy students, that'll come because their parents came, or brothers and sisters and so forth. But we do, under the law, we do have the requirement to come out and present to the 7th and 8th graders. And then we have an open house that we run, so the kids can come to the campus and see what we offer.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
This might be a question for you, Jamie, and so $280 million, right? Say we get $100 million reimbursement, then we're a large part of the school, less than half though, but what happens when the towns vote yes for the project, but then how does that work with then the town dynamics to not fund the project? Like, do you have to, how do you reconcile the two? I only say this, we talk so much about
No.
projects, and this feels like something that needs to be talked about more, maybe?
Sure.
I don't know.
So through Mr. Chairman, so a couple things. One, most towns will likely go out and do a debt exclusion. And, I hope everybody's aware by now, if not my Monday presentation after tonight, after tomorrow, that the wish list that the town has is so overwhelmingly higher than the money we have. The assessment, given the fact that Franklin's a larger community, right, and we'll take, to John's point, that share, we obviously have to look at the numbers. We're very fortunate in our form of government here in Franklin with a town council and a council manager form of government where every 2 weeks we can have a mini town meeting. So, we can work with those numbers, we can look at the budget, we'll obviously have to see what our assessments are, what the final MSBA, so I know that the average resident today everywhere wants to know, how much am I gonna pay, right? But it would be a little premature to even start throwing numbers out there, and I don't feel very comfortable about that. And so to know what the total price tag is also gonna depend on interest rates at that moment. I don't foresee them getting better soon, but, you never know. So all likelihood is the town would do a debt exclusion on a regularly scheduled election, which is a whole nother strategy of a rabbit hole we won't go down. But just to contrast, if you're a smaller community where you only have town meeting once a year, these can be more challenging in terms of how they finance things. And I think Superintendent McGuire and everybody else is certainly conscientious of the fact that the town managers in some of the adjacent communities, and some of the smaller communities that George pointed out, the smaller communities may have the capacity in Sherburne to be able to pay for it out of their budget. But those mid-sized communities where they don't have regularly scheduled elections or they can't maneuver as much, they have less flexibility within their budgets. Those are going to be huge challenges, and Superintendent McGuire is probably more primed to answer that question. But make no mistake, some of our neighboring communities are struggling with this question right now. But in Franklin, we do have a little more flexibility. We do have elections in November. Remember, every other town has them in April or May or March, which is challenging as well, right? Because there are metrics on when to do elections and what are successful, what's not successful. Springtime, for example, is usually more popular. Fall can sometimes be dicey, but it is a good question. If 8 of the towns vote yes to finance something, I think the inconvenient truth is that those towns where the project does go through, if they don't find a way to finance it, I think there are going to be likely some very devastating cuts to those other communities in terms of general services or other school services in those communities. Is that generally accurate?
So, yeah, I think that we've tried to get out early to
Yeah.
talk about this. Again, it's we're talking about 2027. We've been on the road now for the 2 years that I've been here, and Dan before me, to talk to all of the communities about what's happening with this building. It's a broken building, it needs to be fixed. There was no way around that piece of it. The, how to pay for it is up to each individual community. Some communities have, as Jamie said, found a way within, or they believe that they'll find a way within their means to be able to finance the building. Others are talking about having to do a debt exclusion to pay for it, which again, I'll come back to the legislation piece of it. If it's not just here in Franklin, it's 119 communities right now. There are only 26 career and voc schools in the Commonwealth. And if 9 are in the pipeline now, it stands to reason that the rest will be coming shortly. They're all built at the same time. So virtually everywhere will be impacted by a vocational building project at some point. So it would stand to reason that our legislative body would come to a consensus that we need to be able to do something. I live in Carver, and I've talked about this a lot. I live in Carver, and our vocational school is Old Colony. Old Colony has 500 students. Tri-County has 1,000. So the impact of the building project at Old Colony, which is 2 years behind where we are, if we're looking at $280 million, they'll be looking at $310 million. The impact over 500 kids in those communities, I'll tell you, the town of Carver is, not an affluent community. And so from a taxpayer standpoint, I know what that could look like, which is why I think that the legislation is so important.
And through Mr. Chairman, we've tried to also advocate, I think I said this quickly offline, but just for the record and for everybody else, we've also tried to advocate for a customer service friendly model here, recognizing people only have so much time to go out to vote. We've been working, although I don't know if it'll be successful because I understand the precedented sense, but we've been trying to work on some sort of legislative relief where the vote for the financial authorization could be at the same day as the vote for the authorization of the school. I don't think that's going to be likely, and I understand from the state's perspective, it's a dangerous kind of new path to build, but I think I would speak for most voters. I think people on a school project especially, if there's one thing, right, that people would love to go out and vote for once, thinking they're authorizing the project and the financing to go with it, I think that's something the state has to consider for this project. It might pass by, but future ones, making people go out twice is just really ridiculous. And they got to fix that. And I understand why they do that, and I understand it goes back 40, 50 years, but to get school projects authorized in this manner, especially with debt exclusions, if people are going out to support the project, they're likely going out to support the financing to go with it. Why are we making people go out twice? And that's the case to your point, Nicole. If you go out in October to authorize the project, some people may think they're voting for the whole project and not realize they have to go out in March to go vote for the financing of it in the middle of sleet and rain and snow. And truly, those things that kind of sometimes make people not want to go out. So we've tried to work with them. We've had very active conversations with Tri-County and the clerks and other managers. We have been working with our legislators, both Rep. Roy, Senator Spilka. Everybody has been very open. They've been meeting with us, talking with us about it. It is a tough issue, but we have been trying to work on that just for the public to know that we respect that. It's a challenging thing. So.
Yeah, because the law that governs that type of election, 16N under Chapter 70, was established back when the district agreement was written 50 years ago. So it talks about, and I'll use Tri-County again as the example, it talks about how the regional school district, again, if you look at all 11 communities as one town, what the authorization of the governing board of that regional school has the authorization to do. So that would mean Tri-County's school committee only has the authorization to bond the debt for the school and not say how it's paid for by each individual town.
Right.
which is why that ballot question is only about whether or not you support the building project, not about how it will be paid for in Franklin or Sherburne or North Attleboro. It's specific only to the building project, and it is, everyone's asked that same question. Yeah, Jamie's
Yeah.
right with that.
Okay. Anybody?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify one item that I know, you mentioned the per pupil cost. I gave you the per pupil cost for your assessment for Franklin. Our per pupil cost is about 22,000.
Which is?
16,000 is the net per pupil cost for Franklin, after our other revenue.
Okay, but what's the overall?
The overall is about 22.2.
22. Big difference.
Yeah, big difference, yeah. The net cost after deducting Chapter 78 that's applicable to the town of Franklin brings it to 16.3. Yeah, our gross costs are 22.2.
Okay. Any questions from Mr. Sherlock?
Thank you. Steve Sherlock, Franklin Matters, Community Reporter. Thanks for the information around the financing, and I understand all that. It's complicated. Good luck, because I think you're the first ones going through it as well. One of the other pieces that you mentioned, and Norfolk Aggie mentioned as well, clearly with climate change coming, this technical need for skilled people is going to be growing and growing and growing. And yet you're only budgeting for the 1,000, not more. Has that been part of the discussion? I'm assuming it has, but can you elucidate on that too?
Yeah, that's a great point, and people do ask us that. And the way that so we're going through the process with the MSBA in order to be able to get the maximum amount of reimbursement. And what that starts, when you start with that process, they look at the enrollment trends of the 11 communities and make sure that this building that we're building for 50 years isn't a waste of building money for a facility that would be too large to house the need for the students in the area. So this school was approved to stay at 1,000 based on the enrollment trends in the 11 communities that sent to Tri-County. Even though we have a waiting list, and even though we have a substantial number of students from out of the district trying to apply, we're still, based on what the MSBA approval rate was, maxed at 1,000.
Okay. Anyone else? We good up here? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. We'll see you in a couple of weeks with some real numbers.
Come on up. I'm sure he'll move.
Do you need me to look at?
Just for the members, I just, Lucas had sent a slideshow about an hour ago or so, and I just forwarded the PDF version to everybody, so everybody does have a copy, and we will add it to the budget, town budget webpage tomorrow.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having us this evening, and thank you for the service you do, all the Finance Committee members for the town of Franklin. My name is Dave McNeil. I'm a school committee member here, and I have the privilege of serving as the Budget Subcommittee Chair, joined tonight by Superintendent Lucas Jagier and School Business Administrator Miriam Goodman. So we on the Franklin School Committee are charged by our community to care for the Franklin Public School system and provide the best possible educational experience for every student that comes through our doors. And we take that responsibility very seriously. And it's through that lens that we have crafted the budget that we're speaking to you tonight. The modern world and workforce is increasingly more competitive and demanding more and more from young people that are going out into it. For that reason, higher education institutions are demanding more of their graduates, and in turn, it's creating us to need to raise the bar for our standards on our end to prepare them for that. It's for that reason that we in the Franklin Public School System are always asking, how can we provide better curricula, better services, better programs, and better extracurricular activities for them to be more competitive and prepared when they do leave our doors and graduate. And not just to survive when they leave, but truly thrive. We want the current generation of Franklin Public School students to have a better educational experience than the ones that came before them. And that really is the promise of every generation to the subsequent generations. Asking the question, how can they leave the world just a little bit better of a place than they did before them, and how can they make life for the next generation just a little bit better? And that's what we're asking in this budget. We ask that question, how can we make the lives of the next generation of Franklin Public School students better than it was the one before them? And that's the philosophy that went into this budget and really every budget that comes from the Franklin Public Schools. And we asked that question for this generation because someone else already asked that question for us. So thank you again for having us. I'm now going to turn it over to Lucas and Miriam.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. It's good to see you all again. We met on December 7th for the deep dive. Thanks for inviting us then. We have a presentation tonight. There are many slides. Some are for reference, so we'll move through them quickly in the spirit of trying to keep everyone's attention. And we'll key in on some important information. Some are follow-ups to questions we received during the deep dive to just provide a little more context. And then we'll provide an opportunity for questions at the end, obviously, from you. So basically, just talking through just big picture, zooming out strategy, pre-K through age 22. We educate all students. There's no interview process, no application. We get every kid who resides in Franklin. And ultimately, pre-K through age 22, we're really working towards these goals. It's called the Portrait of a Graduate. We talked a bit about this already, but ultimately we're trying to shape young people that graduate and have these skills all the way through their development. Moving forward to this year, just to kind of zoom in a little bit closer, what were our 5 areas that we're working towards within the Franklin Public Schools this year at a very, very high level? It's around trying to really create opportunities to support students in growing their social emotional well-being, right? Helping them to become healthy people and have strategies and skills to manage that. Also, the academic side of things, looking at having engaging and rigorous curriculum for kids to learn and access throughout their development, all the way through high school. And ultimately trying to make sure that we're providing the top quality instruction that this town has come to expect from Franklin Public Schools and the reputation we have, uphold that, and also do right by our students so they're prepared as they enter, as Mr. McNeil mentioned. Moving forward, talking through communication and really trying to partner with our families and community, and really keeping an eye on equity to make sure every student who walks through that door gets the opportunity to be educated with the same opportunities as everyone. We've really, really worked hard this year to align our systems, looking at the district level through each of the levels, middle school, high school, elementary, and at the school level. And we've created some really coordinated efforts for planning to streamline our goals and to really work towards making sure that we're providing an opportunity for students in Franklin. We have 10 schools. We have 5 elementaries, we have 3 middle, and 1 high school. So by the time students hit high school, they could have gone through a combination of elementary and middle. So it's really important to us that every student, as they move through each level, gets the opportunity to be educated in an equitable way so that they arrive at freshman year as 1 class at Franklin High School with those skills along the way. And our teachers do an excellent job of making that happen. Just thinking about priorities, one thing that we've experienced, despite some enrollment decrease, we've seen an increase in the students' mental health and really trying to help students as they navigate the school day. We've also seen some gaps in academics that we continue to try to solve and work through some really high quality, I'll call it tier 1, but for the example here is what are we providing every kid in classroom instruction and really trying to beef that up. And looking at meeting students' needs with special education and our social emotional health, as I mentioned. I'll just pause there for a minute to just say, we have not only a legal obligation, but we have a moral responsibility for kids as they come through Franklin Public Schools. And I mentioned earlier, we educate all, and I am also a community member. I'm a parent in this town. I live in this town as well, and I've dropped my own daughter off at her middle school, and to see vans roll up, students get out in wheelchairs, to see refugee families who've moved into town go into class and get educated and get the language-based goals so that they can continue to learn and acquire the language. And to have students who just arrived yesterday to fourth generation Franklin families all converging on a school to be educated. And the only thing that we ask is that they call Franklin home is really important to me, and it's important to the folks that work within our school system to try to really meet kids where they're at and do the best that we can. In order to do that, you need the systems to support it. And you might have heard me say this, I know Mr. Helen has, and many of the people behind me at different things. You can have every goal. It's from Atomic Habits. It's a book that's out by James Clear, but ultimately you can have all the loftiest or the best goals in the world, but if you don't have systems to support those goals, you fall short. And we're really trying to talk about tonight, when we think about systems, we're trying to provide those for our kids. And that's why we're advocating for the resources that we are. I will move through these. These were some national and Franklin impacts to students, because I want to focus in on some of the key pieces here. When we think about elementary, this came up on December 7th. The question was asked about some of the folks that work with kids beyond teachers. And one thing that we tried to do in preparation for tonight was try to come and present and share some of this information. So you'll notice here, this is basically a profile of a pre-K student, someone who is in our early childhood center in pre-K. The next is a third grader and then a fifth grader. So these students come, you'll notice that the pre-K student has a learning disability. All of them are being educated by a classroom teacher in some capacity. At the elementary level, elementary teachers teach multiple subjects, right? The 4 main subjects they have to learn and master and educate. And beyond that, in each of these cases, you'll have a kid who has a learning disability and needs an individualized education plan. So a special educator will also join that team to educate students and provide instruction. We may have to provide transportation. Could be a van, means you need a van driver. It means that you have to really coordinate that along the way to provide that for students. And then at the bottom, you'll notice all of the different folks that may interact in a school day that work with a kid. An occupational therapist to work on maybe mobility or different items, different skills. And then you'll notice speech and language, or it could just be a variety of different personnel that we have within our building to educate. To just move forward in that same theme, the 3rd and 5th graders, you'll notice they have different things occurring, but a 3rd grader who comes to us with a trauma background might need counseling support, behavioral support. We may be collaborating with Department of Children and Families. And then at the bottom, you'll notice the safety teams involved, a school adjustment counselor, a social worker may be working with that family to connect them to outside supports beyond the school. And finally is a 5th grader with some lagging skills. Maybe more typical student ultimately is in a class where they're looking at exploring STEM. We're trying to provide a literacy intervention because maybe we've identified an area. And ultimately, if you see at the bottom, there are math and literacy specialists that are working to identify students and what their needs are and then provide support and work with teachers on that. You have digital learning integrationists. We hear a lot about students, and we all grew up in an age where technology was kind of something we added to our life. Students today are brought up in an environment where technology is basically like an appendage. So there is different levels of support that we're expected to provide for kids around that. The safeties, the dangers, the appropriateness of it. And I think we're all given the tools to do that, but oftentimes we don't have the training and support needed to do that well. Just to keep moving. 6th, 7th, and 8th. In each of these examples, once again, I'll just give a minute of pause because you have a 7th grade teacher no matter what. There's an educator in front of those kids. But based on the needs, you'll notice below there's different groups of people that are working to help kids. And I'll just call your attention to the 8th grade example where we have a student who's learning English It's their second language. They're in classes across the board, an 8th grade class for history and math, and they have a language goal, and they have a teacher who specializes in trying to help them understand our language. And the general ed teacher who's teaching, the math teacher, is also trained and has received an endorsement to do the same so that they're modifying lessons to meet those needs. This particular kid also stays after school for clubs, and we offer that as well for kids. Finally, the 18 to 22-year-old program, post high school, right? This is specially designed instruction. They might have an off-site job coach, kids who are ages 8 to 22. We try to make sure that we are providing opportunities within our community for vocation, for work, life skills, and that all takes support and takes personnel to do those things. Once again, you'll notice occupational therapy and special education. In the middle, we have a student who was hospitalized and transitioning back, who needs some counseling support, maybe is taking some electives that we've offered in the past around art and music, is in a program to continue to transition into the high school, and also may be in the band, is in the jazz band and DECA, and this is a profile of a student that would receive these types of support from these types of folks. You'll see guidance on there. Every student has a guidance counselor at our high school who's working with them on their individual goals, whether they're college-bound or working towards a 2-year college, military work after. There's just a variety of ways in which we're trying to help prepare students. And then finally, we have a student who maybe is homeless, so we're providing transportation in accordance with the regulations to get them to and from school, but they participate in athletics. They're in senior project. They're in mock trial, and then those are the types of folks that work with them throughout the day. So just thought it was important to highlight because we talked about this on December 7th, and when we walked away, I thought I needed to provide a tangible example of how this works. So we spent time on Chapter 70 during the deep dive. So this is just a very big overview of it, but this time what we thought we would do is we have actual numbers now that we can apply to the formula, which is the next slide, and I'll kick it to Miriam Goodman to walk through.
Yeah, so at a high level, the state identifies and calculates a foundation budget, which is a funding level that would provide an adequate level of education to our students in Franklin. It's based on our enrollment, a wage adjustment factor, and inflation, and you can see that's the $65.2 million number. From that, they decide what can Franklin afford to pay. That's the required local contribution in the green box. That's based on property, wealth, and income, and a municipal revenue growth factor. The state's determined that that amount is $47.2 million. So from the 65 less the 47, you would generally get a number close to $18 million based on the formula. That's how much the Chapter 70 formula would fund for Franklin. But Franklin is already receiving $29 million, roughly $29 million. That's where the excess base aid is coming from that is held harmless. So we're already getting almost $11 million more than the formula allows for us. And that's as a result of the formula that was established in the 90s when our enrollment was much lower. So we're a minimum aid district. We're only going to get what's identified in the law, which is $30 per pupil at this point in time. I will tell you that the Senate budget came out this week and identifies that as $60 a head. We'll see that finalized sometime in July. So there might be another $153,000 coming into the town. Hasn't been finalized yet, but right now we're banking on the first $153,000 as part of our minimum aid. So from that, the state will take our Chapter 78 of $29 million and expect us to contribute the $47 million that they've identified, and then our net school spending would be that total $76.2 million in the bottom gray box. And net school spending is the amount that we are required to spend on education for the students in Franklin. We are spending more than that, right? We are spending 13.3% more than that, roughly $9.4 million more than we're required to spend. But the key factor is that the majority of districts in Franklin spend on average, I'm sorry, in Massachusetts, spend on average 43% more than net school spending. So 75% are spending more than the 13.3 that we are.
So we put together a graph, because one of the questions that came up December 7th when we had the deep dive was, well, we're spending over the amount, right? The amount over, and we thought we would just provide a comparison to just put the Hockomock League out there. That's something we all know, can wrap our heads around, just to provide a little bit of context to where we fall within that range. So you'll see all of the teams that we play against in the Hockomock League as examples to kind of where Franklin falls. The percentage, 13.3, Merriam reference, once again, this is the Hockomock League, just as a comparison to show you that percentage amount. So from dollars to percentages. 13.3. The state average is closer to 42 or 43,
yeah,
as Miriam mentioned.
So you can see by this slide, it's a summary of the Chapter 70. You might have seen it earlier in the presentation by our predecessors. Our enrollment is declining overall 1.47%. That's the trend that we're seeing right now. Our foundation budget is going up as a result of the Student Opportunity Act. It's going to continue to go up, as well as the required district contribution. As long as the foundation budget continues to go up and the enrollment continues to go down, the required district contribution is also going to go up. And as long as our Chapter 78 is $11 million over the formulaic amount that we are required, that we would get, we're still going to be required to contribute more towards the foundation budget. And that just graphically presents that. That will cap out at 82.5%. I expect that roughly 2028 or so. So in terms of per pupil spending, we talked about that at our last meeting, and you heard a little bit about that from Tri-County. It's spending $22,000 per pupil. Our average is $15,982 dollars in district compared to the state's $18,005. We are in the 20th percentile. 80% of districts in Massachusetts spend more than we do. On the other side of that coin, in terms of local effort from wealth, 12% of cities and towns have a greater local effort from income wealth than Franklin. So we talked about the state averages in terms of per pupil, 16% below the state average. And then again, comparison to some of our Hockomock League districts, we're at $15,982. Hard to see some of those others, but you can see where we fall in the graph in terms of their per pupil expenditures. So in terms of summarizing our FY24 budget, at this point, the school committee has approved a budget in the amount of $73,591,000. That's a $3.37 million increase, or 4.8% over our current FY23 budget. This is some historical data as to the superintendent's requested budget versus how much the town council has allocated towards the schools in the past 5 years. In terms of the assumption in this budget, as you know, the town administrator's recommended increase in the allocation from the town is $1,031,954. That's a 1.47% increase over our FY23 budget. Our budget includes health insurance rate increases of 5.2%. It includes the 14% required out-of-district private school tuition rate increase as set by the Operational Services Division for specialized placements in private schools for out-of-district tuition, out-of-district placement services. Other out-of-district tuition rate increases are coming in somewhere in the 5 to 10% range. Our transportation that we're required to provide for students in out-of-district placements, as well as our big yellow buses for in-district students that we are required to transport, as well as others. Those rate increases are going up about 8%, and we are increasing the use of our one-time revolving funds by $1.5 million for a total of about $7.1 million. You'll see in a later slide.
Here's a graphic representation of the 14%. One thing, I know a bill has been filed. We met with legislators to try to mitigate this. Nothing's been finalized or been communicated to us around this, but this just gives a little bit of context of what districts were expecting to pay, and then to see the 14% increase. You'll notice in the bottom left corner of the slide how that translates to Franklin is an increase, a total amount of $775,000.
So again, just to summarize, the major categories in terms of the 24 approved budget at $73.5 million. You can see where the differentials are, the majority being in salaries at 2.9 mil. It's again a $3.3 million budget increase over FY23, and obviously we're aware that the council's that the town administrator's recommendation is $71.2 million. So we'll see some of that. Largest piece of the budget being salaries and healthcare and Medicare costs, roughly 87% of the budget. Out-of-district tuition at 5.7%, other expenses at 3.7%, transportation at 3.2%. Overall, 4.8% increase.
We'll move through some of these.
So some of these investment initiatives we're going to go through. We'll go through these slides pretty quickly because I'm sure the burning question in your head is that, you know, at a $73 million budget that the school committee has approved and a $71 million allocation that the town administrator is recommending, I'm guessing that one of the questions you might have is, how are we going to get from here to there? So these are items that were included in the superintendent's recommended budget that you'll see. They, at this point, have all been removed. These are items, though, if you just stop right there, those are items that the additional requests that were not included in the superintendent's budget, but the school committee approved, including them in the budget, which brought it to $73.5 million. And those items are all being removed. So when we look at the next slide, you'll see a summary of the reductions that we're looking at. The first two items being reductions from investment initiatives, basically all of the new initiatives that you just saw on the past 4 or 5 slides, plus the new investment initiatives that the school committee added. The other 3 categories, largely speaking, reducing services, reducing positions, and raising revenues. So those are the budget reductions that we are looking at this point. Nothing's been finalized, but that's a summary of the positions that we're looking at to reduce in order to meet the allocation based on the recommendation of the town administrator at 71.25 mil.
With that said, I just would add the recommended allocation is going to impact us greatly. And I just want to put that out there. You know, we all have roles to play, right? We all serve in different ways. Mine is to advocate for our district, but also our students. And that number will result in us seeing a reduction in not only force and people, but in the level of service that this town has come to expect of us across this community. And we are at a place where we're really trying to field the best team we can, right, with the budget that we have. But I would be remiss if I did not say that. And this is just an example, without getting into any detail around, we're still working. We put a lot of time in through this budget process when We had proposed a number, the most recent number from the recommendation from the town administrator. We've spent over 20 hours trying to look at all the different areas that we can work as a team. But at the end of the day, I just would want to call to some of the things on here around the programming that we are known for, what we offer for kids, whether it's in school, after school, extracurriculars. Basically, in a company that has a research and development department to continue to stay active, those are some areas, if you'll notice in here, is committee work, summer work, site-based funds reductions, looking at different programming, late buses for after school, and ultimately some of the FTEs, which is your full-time equivalent, so teaching positions, or not just teaching positions, because it's district, elementary, middle, and high school. So to balance the budget and get to that number, it's taking a lot for us to get there. And I just wanted to put that out there as kind of the impact, and I think that's what we wanted to get across as we move forward. These slides, I would just call to one question that's come up. It was raised before, kind of what types of reductions have we had over time, and we did the exercise of that, and I thought as this was requested, it made sense to put this in for you to review as well, but also for folks to kind of understand over time the types of reductions that have had to be made to make budgets. And we understand that being efficient is important, and having the right people in the right places and the right types of supports for kids and systems is important. But over time, to put a system together that meets the needs of the community and meets the goals of trying to educate kids is really that challenge. And I think that's why we're here tonight, and just to advocate for some of the things along the way. This is really this is the end of the presentation, and we're happy to open it up to questions.
Just one quick question.
Sure.
From what I read on the internet of the budget, the quoted number of pupils was 4712 or something like that, but the slides indicated 5150. I read it twice.
So the slides on the Department of Ed are based on enrollment that's 2 years back. Okay, so the Department of Ed's Chapter 70 enrollment is based on 2 years ago's enrollment. We're building a budget based on 4,600 in terms of projections. I would also say that the slides on the DESE website will include students who are residents of Franklin and are, I have to say, give me a second, in the charter school, because they're impacted through the assessments, and like Teka Academy, the online, so they're residents. I'm not gonna say Tri-County and Norfolk Aggie, because you saw them, and they have an allocation based on enrollment in Franklin on their specific enrollment. So they're separate in that respect, even though the Chapter 70 money comes to Franklin, and then it's divided to a portion to Tri-County and to Norfolk Aggie, as well as to Franklin Public Schools. But the portion coming to Franklin Public Schools includes a portion of revenue for Franklin residents that might not be attending Franklin schools.
Gee, that was simple.
Sorry.
I thought it was an easy question.
Sorry, okay.
Maybe we're currently
at is we're budgeting for 4,600 to show up on our doorstep. And our enrollment and our projections based on classroom size, class sections at the elementary level, at the middle level, at the high school level, based on 4602.
4602. Okay, in here it said
Projection.
27
It's 40
something, somewhere in the 8,000 pages that I read. Questions?
That's what the town administrator wrote.
No, I was gonna, but they addressed it.
Okay. I'll tell you what he's going to. Has there been any effort, I'm sure there's been an effort, I won't say that, here's the box we're stuck in. Is there any direction to get outside the box to solve some of these problems? And is there a place outside the box to do that? And I'll give you an example. The police department thought outside the box, changed the entire scheduling of how many hours a week the officers worked, and adjusted, with the union's help, down to 10 hours from 42, I think, or maybe 48. Fire department did the same thing on reorganizing and creating money for additional staff. Is there any effort to think outside the traditional box?
I can't speak for my colleagues from the police and fire department and how they do it, but for public schools, we're in a model where we don't operate, like we couldn't do shifts of kids come at night and during the day, right? So that's one thing I would say. So thinking about schedule, you may recall some start time conversations we had to shift start times by an hour. And I would just tell you.
I was going to say, that has happened before, though.
Right. What's that?
Shifts.
Shifts in education.
Yeah,
I would say, I wouldn't recommend an
70s.
educational model of double shifts in a school system in 2023. I would say, and I say that not sarcastically, but just that wouldn't be my recommendation. But we continue to try to meet the needs of every kid. Like I said, we can't increase our tuition in that kind of model. We don't have the ability to do any type of shifts. I don't think that's feasible or recommended for what we're trying to do. And we work to schedule, like student schedules, teacher schedules, to accommodate all the needs and all of the demands that we have across our school. But it's difficult to get a question for us to think outside the box after we just presented multiple slides about how we've been really underfunded for a long time. And I'm not pointing fingers at any particular person, but it's hard to be in the seat and say, what can we do differently? How can we save more money when we're already showing some information that shows how we're funded? And I call this as a call out to our community about that kind of support, because it's just a difficult question to figure out how we would do that. I will tell you, creatively visioning, we're trying to work through getting our early college and career opportunities for students. It takes a schedule that permits that and supports that for kids to be able to have the classes they need. As we look to continue to build out, we have a senior project program that's at our high school. We want to provide STEM education. We talked a little bit earlier, I think Mr. Sherlock asked a question around some of the industries that are continuing to evolve and wanting to prepare students and have access to those. If we continue to, we're actually having conversations around how do we keep class sizes less than 25 in an elementary. So it's hard to have the conversation when, if we had the support to do those things, I think I would just say that would be my answer to the question, is around what have we done? We continue to create schedules that aren't fluff, do not, but ultimately, we're going to see an impact to the budget as we continue to do. I've heard others say this before me. I've been in Franklin since 2003. I was a teacher here, assistant principal, and as assistant superintendent, and now here in the superintendency, and also a parent and a resident. And I just would say, I think we have a lot of people doing a lot of great work with the resources we have, but I don't think we should be just relying on what we've been able to do. I think we need to really think about how this works, what systems need to be in place for ours to provide a high level of education.
Can I ask a question on that? What would be your solution? Where do you get the $2 million?
Well, we had a legislative forum. The same question was basically asked. There was a question to State Rep Roy around this. Based on our funding, I think we'd have to look at, I think that local contribution is one area that I think we would have to look at. The state is not going to. I think we get in this pattern of having conversations around the state coming through to change something in our favor, where we just showed a slide around we're being held harmless for $10 million. So I don't think the state is going to provide that particular solution. So his I don't want to quote him, but if you go back to the tape, it was around, it's not going to happen beyond the community. And I use the word community very carefully because I think we've used words like town, and it gets synonymous with town council, this. It's community. And I think we have to have those kinds of discussions.
Yeah, which I guess would just be a tricky sell, right? Because you'd be going to the town and you'd say, we're gonna raise your taxes. And we've had the in-depth discussions here, right, to understand why, like, what's going into cost, but it's like, you know, it's been getting less and less in kids. It's just a hard ask.
Yeah, and be clear, I wouldn't be asking that. I just think, and Mr. Helen and I have talked about that. That's not an ask I have. You asked the question of how do you fund that? I'm just trying to provide context to how this is done. It's not something that as a superintendent.
I'm totally connecting dots that you're not saying.
No, I just want you, I want to be clear on record that that's not something that I'm suggesting at this moment. I just wanted to be clear about what role I play in this, and it's to advocate for schools and say there are ways that would happen.
So I guess on that front too, thinking about the community, I like that word, right? So when we think about taxes and raising taxes, how do we, or how have we, and how are we going forward going to rally the community? So it's not just the schools, it's fire, it's DPW, it's everybody, right? You put $2 million into the schools, you're taking it from somewhere, from where we are right now, call it taxes flat. So how do we, who charges that? Is it the community going to the town council and holding them accountable? Like, what is who's the leader here to say, let's rally everyone together? Because I don't know, is it the school committee to have to build further relationships with those other departments to say, hey, we need to show a united front? Have we started that? Is that what we need to do? Like, if that is the solution, which it's sounding like, I'm gonna say it is, right? This is just hypothetical, then how do we get there? Because it sounds like we've been talking, as you said, years about this. It feels like we might be at an inflection point, or we've probably already been at an inflection point, but we're saying it out loud now. It's only going to get worse. So how do we move forward and take action? Because it will take potentially a couple years or whatever it could be, right? So just curious how we get the process started, or at least rally everybody together, because it feels you give to one, you take from the other, but I don't think that's how it should be approached, right? It should be everybody's bought into building the best community in Franklin. I view it as you pull from one department to give to another. Well, if there's an emergency at a school, I sure want an extra police officer there, right? So using that as an example, but so how do we move forward, I guess, from here would be kind of a high level question.
Do you want to take that one, Mr. Helen?
Sorry, loaded,
I know. Well, it involved a lot of parts. It's a great question.
I'm an action person. Like, what do we do from here? It's kind of like, kind of off into what Natalie just said.
So, Miriam, could you, or Lucas, could you put the slide up with the breakdown in the 3.37 million? I know the salaries piece will stick out, and I'm not going to focus on that too much, but so to answer your question a little bit, Nicole, part of what you just said is an incredible start. So tomorrow night, I have a few more slides as we talked about last night to kind of wrap up, but before I do those slides, I do think it's important for the Finance Committee to go through all of the departments, the entire budget, see where the money is, do the typical deep dives. Tomorrow's public safety and regional dispatch, okay? Ultimately, to answer Natalie's question, you really have three choices, right? You basically either raise property taxes, you either, cut municipal funding, which you just pointed to, Nicole, and shift funding from, the town departments, if you will, over to the schools. Or the third option is the schools need to redefine exactly what their service delivery is. All three are horrible choices, right? They're very challenging. And Natalie pointed out, the enrollment-based reductions, over time, have helped the budget, been able to solve the budget. I think, as Lucas has always pointed out, Sarah did as well, and Miriam has pointed out, that over the past 15 years, while the school enrollment has plummeted and will continue to decline, there's no question about that, for a variety of reasons, right? Not just birth rates, not just the boom that was here 20 years ago for all the kids that came through from the housing development, but also there's just a lot of competition, right? There's a variety of different ways to educate kids. And so I just want to point out, that those are really simply the three choices that you have. And I just want to point out the cost drivers. This is not, just to premise this is not my commentary, but this is a structural issue we have seen for 10 years. I've been here 8 years. All of you on the committee have heard this. Everyone who's read my boring fiscal forecasts have read this on the first page for really a decade, okay? As all of you saw last night, and I think a lot of the other audience members probably watched, I hope they did, I went through a 25-minute presentation on the revenue model, right? And everyone in the Finance Committee has been through that presentation a couple times now. It's the first page on the budget. And when you go through, ultimately what we decided last night is in the tax base, you have $3.3 million new dollars in new revenue. 3.3 million. The whole community. That's it. Like, no, Jeff was legendary. Oh, there's money under bags over. There is no other drawers. There's no other bag. So right here alone, and we've went through this, I have consistently said on the record for years, I have never, ever, ever said once the school district or any department should not ask for what they need. They should always put in the number for what they need. And as you see the numbers that Miriam put up on another chart, typically the request is up in 3.3 million, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, 3.8, a couple of them. When you have 3.3 million this year, that means 2.5% less last year and back and forth. So the schools have always asked for more money than the entire allotment of new revenue that the town has asked. This is not me giving a critique. This is me talking straight facts to try to explain to the public, while we have moments like this, to make them understand where the cost driver problems are. And when we say, what are the options, when Natalie or Nicole say, what are our choices, Miriam has another couple slides talking about the ability to pay on slide 14. Our ability to pay is a lot less than those other communities. The tax levy in Franklin is very, very low. And a large part of that is just because of historical context in terms of what the land values were in Franklin. As land values and property values continue to increase, your property tax bills are going up more than 2.5% every year because your value of your property is going up 17%. And so when you look at this number of 3.37 million, that's greater than the entire revenue pot the town has. Like, it just is what it is. I don't know how else to play it. It just is what it is. And last night we saw a slide, and we've done this before at FinCom hearings, of fixed costs. Lights, stormwater, electricity, gas, propane. I put up there last night the municipal staff, 2.5% COLA. I put up there a whole bunch of other examples. Property and casualty insurance, workers' comp insurance. I put up there a slide with about 17 million or so, and yes, that number could be a little lower, it could be a little higher. About 17 million that's in the municipal side budget for school-related costs, debt exclusions, debt and interest, building projects, retiree health insurance for teachers. The town pays out of its it's half of the budget, if you will. But when you look at these cost drivers on the school side, it's not to say they're not needed. It's not to say they're not warranted. I support all of this. But if you're sitting in this chair over here, I can't talk hyperbole. I can't say what I want. I have to tell people exactly what it really is. And I hope people, if they didn't watch last night's meeting, watch at least the first half hour or so. I hope everybody got some good information about where some of the municipal cost drivers are. And I think the schools are facing exactly the same thing. I think Tri-County said earlier, what did they say right out of the gate? Inflation, right? All these other cost drivers are eating into exactly what that is. And so when I look up here, and even just the salary increase alone, we know that the school district budget is 78% salaries. The municipal budget's not far from it too. It's a little lower because of all the debt, all the debt and interest and some of the other fixed costs. How could you possibly fund a $3 million increase in just salaries when the town's only bringing in 3.33 million new in revenue? I mean, otherwise, what I have to do is choice two, which is cut roads, basically probably shut buildings, shut off streetlights, look at the senior center for less hours, library hours less, fewer police officers, whatever else is in the budget. I'm just using those as examples, not like real life. Snow and ice, we would cut that out, right? Because we can legally say under snow and ice, we can legally actually overspend that account. and we can actually count debt against snow and ice because it's a public emergency, I don't think anybody wants that. I mean, I hope they don't, because that's just more public danger, right? So if you're me and you sit there and you say, well, I can't cut property and casualty insurance, I can't cut health insurance for our employees, I can't cut a lot of other places. I mean, I think we've been through this many, many years. You know, there's just a lot of fixed costs. And when people look at the town administrator's recommended budget, I strategically did something that I thought was very important, and we'll hear about this tomorrow night as well as the town council. The competing demands that people are talking about are just absolutely unfundable for probably the rest of my career, right? I think I made everybody depressed on Monday. I hope everybody had a good night's sleep last. But in all seriousness, you know, mental health initiatives, road work, net zero initiatives, sidewalks, infrastructure. We just keep adding to the want list. And as I frequently said the other night, we're trying to just get the senior center van that we lost 8 years ago back on the doles, right? I mean, really, we're trying to catch up. This is not, by the way, for people that blame the pandemic, this is not a pandemic thing. I'm sorry. I am way over that. We have to move on. We can't keep on blaming things on the pandemic. This has nothing to do with the pandemic. This has been a structural problem in Franklin since Jeff was here and goes way back. So when I look at these slides, and I certainly the out-of-district tuition in my budget narrative, that was not part of the budget model. It wasn't a part of the budget model. But a $700,000 increase, where I miscalculated in my budget narrative was because every school district in Massachusetts is going through this pain. I thought that was a legislative relief layup, and I found out otherwise that it's not. So we may not be getting 10% of the 14% paid back. To be honest, you know, I can't think of a more important issue. The billionaire's tax just went through. There's an extra $1 billion in revenue, and it was $93 million to solve that 14% increase statewide, and somehow we can't seem to advocate loud enough that that should be a priority. So I think where, you know, when you're looking at the options, ultimately, the community has to pay a lot more in property taxes. We have to cut municipal services to fund this chart here, and all of those services will be felt. You know, like again, cut a day off in the library, you know, trim a day on the senior center, eliminate the roads program, lay off, you know, maybe some ground staff, you know, whatever they are. And yet we're at this confluence, or we're going to have to redefine the delivery program. The schools will have to think outside the box, and they will have to reevaluate the service delivery. For example, maybe there's just some level of service, a category possibly, that maybe somewhere along the line that we have to decide as a community we just can't do, okay? And I think we're all struggling, the municipal departments, you'll hear about it tomorrow with public safety, certainly with police and fire. Record-breaking fire calls, you'll hear that tomorrow. We just got the MEC data today about law enforcement calls. They've gone up 30,000 in the regional dispatch center over the last few years. I mean, clearly people are calling the police and fire departments for reasons. So we have a lot of competing demands. We have a lot of service delivery requests. And sometimes I sit here and feel like I'm the only one on earth that says no, and because that's my job. And I don't want to. I wish I had all the money in the world to spend all of this. I think everything that we're trying to do as a community is worthwhile. I think there's a demand for it. I think people want it. But again, I think eventually we have to look at those three choices. Either we have to redefine the service delivery, we have to shift huge cost differentials from one side to another, or we have to pay more in property taxes. And I just put these numbers up there to illustrate, and I hope it's helpful, not hurtful. It's just not even close. It's just simply not even close. And I know that the veteran members of the council and the FinCom and other boards have heard me say this over and over, and I'm sorry that I feel like a broken record. But ultimately, I need to emphasize it heavily just so that the community, as they go out to try to weigh these decisions, right, Nicole, they have the understanding of where the lines in the sand are. I mean, these are really, really, really struggling times. Yet on the flip side of things, when I go around Franklin, I think you're all the same, and I say, you know, I was on my first page, I know it's annoying, people want to just get to the numbers. Quality of life in this community is probably some of the best in the United States of America. It truly is. We are literally probably victims of our own success. I think Superintendent Gear just said it a minute ago. The staff that we have here are unparalleled to any other community. I say it often, I'd put our staff up against any other town. I feel like we're in the Pro Bowl all the time with every department head, principal, and the people that we have. And the people here are making a difference that we see out here, even though these dynamics are in front of us, right? So even though we're struggling with what we have, and while, you know, the message is a little depressing that I'm portraying, when we exit this building tonight, the athletic teams are doing an incredible job. The academic achievement is at an elite level. We have an ISO 1 fire department, one of 450 out of 45,000 in America. We're literally the 0.001%. An accredited police department. We have an incredible library, a senior center that's amazing. We have a full head chef at the senior center to deliver meals. We get, 80 people a day coming in on fixed incomes, 100 people sometimes for programs. I mean, it's a tough balance, right? And I say this out of pride for all that we all do in this room and all the people that are listening at home. It's a hard situation to be in because we want to be really happy and proud with what we have because we really should be really, really fortunate and lucky and not take it for granted. Yet at the same time, we are looking at these numbers, and more so in other areas too, that aren't just school related. All of our staff deserve that money. There's no question about it. Everybody deserves it. No question. How do we get there? Those three choices.
And I think, just a quick follow-up, and thank you for that, I agree. I think the concern too is, because I agree, I think we're exceeding in almost every area, given what we've been dealt with. So how do we now go forward and make sure that doesn't deteriorate, right, over the next 10, 15, whatever that is? I think that's really where kind of my thought is coming from, is we need to think now. So 5 years from now, we heard it last night in the school committee. For those that watched, we postpone until we have to take action, and it's similar in this regard. We don't want to deteriorate, and then we're in a hole that we can't get ourselves out of, essentially.
Phenomenal question. So ultimately, as Lucas pointed out just a moment ago, and I'm going to go through a couple slides on overrides tomorrow night, okay, in terms of how to do it, what the process is, and pieces like that. But the short answer to that one question, and we'll go through the mechanics tomorrow night, but tomorrow night, we'll go through some of the mechanics, but on that question alone, just so everyone understands, the paid staff for the town and schools cannot advocate for or against any type of increase in taxes. Okay, it is a state law. So I think part of the question, Nicole, that you ask is one I think maybe the schools and I get a lot, which is, well, you guys do everything, right? Why aren't you doing this? Well, the real reason is when you deal with ballot questions, the town and schools have, the paid staff have a very, very limited ability. And that's designed under Proposition 2.5 for a reason, right? Because it shouldn't be myself, and I think what Lucas was getting to a minute ago, every time a staff member like us says the O word, you lose votes because people get annoyed. They do, and they justifiably get annoyed, right? What is that? Helen says we're doing a great job. What is, what's the up here? Superintendent, come on, what's within your budget? And people just generally get annoyed. The community itself has to go organize itself and painfully figure out some of this self on its own. There was a group 5 or 6 years ago, the superintendent and her and I went. We got requested to go to a meeting to talk about some of the mechanics of these issues. I think some of the people in the room and at home were there. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mel. And they heard from other school committees. And the one that I remember the most was the city of Melrose. Very similar, where they said they thought it was easy. And it was a bunch of newer residents to Melrose. The median income was changing in Melrose. There was new residents moving to Melrose. Sound familiar, anybody? And there was a new level of values going to Melrose that were maybe a little different than in the past, right? And they told the group some sobering stories of, they thought it was obvious. You just go out and do it. And I want to say, and I can't speak for them, I think it took them maybe 4 tries to go out and learn the political science of it, the organizational philosophy of it, how you go work with people, what's the systemic, and they had some really, really great stories. I think that group also had a few other school districts that had some experience, but ultimately that group in Melrose was ultimately a few school committee members and I think a couple of city councilors. And they told some sobering stories of the hard reality. This was pre-pandemic to boot. So they went out and just grinded it out. And they were so dedicated that they finally were victorious. And I'd say that, there have been examples. A lot of people in Franklin talk about how towns never pass an override, right? Or 1 out of 11, right? But I would also argue, even in the worst year of the pandemic, the town council still stuck to the strategy, listened to the taxpayers, and while we sat on the football field in quarantine, 10 feet apart, put the Community Preservation Act on the ballot, and it passed 60% to 40%. And why did that happen? There was a well-defined problem, there was a proposed solution, there was a strategy, and even when the times got really, really hard, where we couldn't go to people's houses and we couldn't do door-to-door, we couldn't do the old it still passed, right? In a year where I think there was a lot of nervous Nellies like myself and others thinking, are people willing to do this in a year like that? And it wasn't even close. It was like 6,000 or 7,000 votes more than the no votes. So I think there's a no excuses kind of clause in that, right? It would have been the easy thing to say, well, we can't do that, let's just run away. And I think it showed some of the mettle, if you will, of being able to still have those conversations with the taxpayers, but it was a grassroots organization. Ultimately, the community defined the problem, defined the solution, defined the strategy, and stuck to it and kept going after it. And obviously there was a success. So I just point to that as the alternative to the narrative of no override has ever passed, or 1 out of 11's passed, and the debt exclusions I think are 8 out of 10, 8 out of 12. So, but ultimately the answer to the question directly, Nicole, the community needs to organize itself, and they need to spend and focus. If you think it's going to take you a certain amount of time to do this, quadruple it. Really. It's a lot of hard work. A lot. And it takes a long time to do it. So.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
If I may, just to tie everything that Jamie just said, thank you very much, Jamie, back to what you were saying, your first point, Nicole, you're absolutely correct. Right now, if we have a pie of a certain size, you cut slices different ways, you're cutting into someone else's piece of the pie, right? But when the whole pie expands, everyone benefits from that. And we started off by saying our charge is to try to provide the best possible educational experience in Franklin Public Schools. We showed the whole slide list of services that we would like to provide and are unable to just because of the fiscal realities of that. And as Jamie just highlighted, there's all sorts of things from public works, public safety, senior center, library, all sorts of other services that they would also love to provide on that side too. And when the whole pie gets bigger, everyone, not just the school part of the community, but also the town part, every single part, every single person in our community benefits from that. So you're absolutely correct that that messaging is important because it's 100% true.
Thank you for saying that. The one thing I wanted to piggyback off of what Mr. Helen said was advocating or support for schools shouldn't come at the cost of other services that we provide in the town, right? So, I've been doing this, I've been in education for 20 years and seen a lot change, but overall, I don't want a soundbite to be out there that we're advocating and we're saying, I think you used an example of like the van or getting the van at the senior center or cutting a library position is not something that we're saying this is what we need to do to do business in an effective way in an area where in our town I'm putting up the slide again around where we're funding, and then if we look at where we land with wealth, I think these are compelling stats. People move here for the services we provide, which includes schools and other services. But at the end of the day, you moved here for one of the reasons. But I know that my property value, I truly believe, I'll only speak for my own home, it's directly impacted by the level of service our schools provide to our students. And if anybody would challenge me on that, I'd find it hard pressed to believe that is not a factor in a town of how you operate. Now, does that mean that every single person's at that level of wealth and income? Absolutely not. This is an average, so I want to just be clear. But at the end of the day, what we're saying is and we have great partners in our police, fire, library, and whatnot. Anything we're saying we're advocating for is around what we need to do the job at the level it's expected to be done, and it's not at the cost of some other department or our fellow, my colleagues.
I had one question. For me, it's just a little bit trying to make sure that I understand the longer term vision of the things that you're looking for as well, right? Because you can project probably enrollment to a degree out 5 years. And understanding you have a long list of things that you're looking for, right? To reach your educational goals over a longer time period. And having that vision of, well, this is what we're thinking this year, and this is why, and these are the, right, that kind of brings me to a different level of understanding that I guess I don't feel like I have quite yet. That would be really helpful for me to be able to say, okay, I understand why this is being sought right now, and this is the solution that you're coming to me with. Because it was helpful to see the stories of these are the things that you have for these kids in each grade. Like, I really liked seeing that, but understanding the longer term, well, how do you get there? And maybe that also gets to some of the out of the box thinking or whatever, right? And I don't know how that works exactly for your industry, right?
That might be a better, maybe Mr. Connolly, thinking about the question of out of the box. We certainly, the box we're in, we end up making reductions because we aren't as flexible with how we can schedule. But I understand your point. We certainly are interested to provide more information about a vision. And I think people want to know, in any context like this, what are you investing in, right? What's the vision for Franklin Public Schools? When I sit here after, in my time, and looking at each year, trying to solve, it's solving a budget and trying to meet a number. And it's been less about trying. And we've, even through that, found really creative ways to provide opportunities for kids along the way. And that's why people come here. This isn't me trying to over commit to the successes that we have across the levels. But I understand the question. We're going to continue to vision out. But I will say the one example I'll give is just looking at, for example, looking at early college and really trying to figure out, there are mechanisms when you have enough staff to field courses for students to enroll and walk out of high school with the equivalent of almost an associate's degree. If you can partner with schools, there's work that we're doing in this effort. The bandwidth it takes to set that up, to organize that, schools who do that well have someone who oversees that entire process and liaisons with colleges. That falls, in our example, not only do we reduce a position, but now we've added that particular function to somebody else who already had a full-time job. So that's like an example of how we've had to do things. So I think the visioning, the point you make, financial literacy, STEM education, careers in 5 years, 10 years that we didn't even think about when we were in high school that are out there, and how are we preparing and moving kids forward. And we have great programming that we offer, pre-K through 12, but ultimately, I understand your question around the vision, and I think if you have that question, others have that as well, and we're happy to provide more on that.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Except me. I want to echo what Jamie said about, I'm a lifelong resident. I have never lived anywhere else. Only 3 houses in my life, and they're all in this town. So I have a stake. And now I'm old, so I got to worry about how much the senior community can contribute without really affecting their life. So that has to be balanced into this whole equation. Secondly, the results you guys get on the limited money, quote limited, I mean, I looked at MCAS and all those kinds of things, and there was a bunch of slides, not a bunch, there was a few slides about achievements and that kind of stuff. And the achievements of every department in town. I mean, I had to take an ambulance ride a month ago. It was the best ride I ever had. The guy took- It was the smoothest ride on Hartford Avenue in Bellingham I have ever had.
Did they give you a scorpion bowl from Hang Tie on the way?
No, it was 20 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, so we were good.
I thought that was your time.
My point is that the services we provide, really second to almost none, even on limited budgets. And my last thing is, thank you for your service, Miriam. I've been on here 10 years, and we've probably had a few emails back and forth. I usually started them with, hi, pain in the ass again, but thank you, and have a good retirement.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Anybody? Motion to adjourn from someone. Motion
Motions
to adjourn.
to adjourn.
Second?
Need a roll call.
Roll call. George,
Yes.
Natalie,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Stephanie,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Tyrell,
Yes.
Chana,
Yes.
and Nicole is yes.
See you tomorrow night. Same time,
you.
same place.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.